7 habits of successful developers. So here are the 7 habits. By the way, thanks to Stephen Covey for giving us the idea of getting essentials of craft down into 7 things, or otherwise known as Miller's number. So the habits: understand the problem, research is good, design, then code and test, write useful tests and good comments, master your tools, keep your status updated in the ALM, and be the best you can be. So understand the problem. It's amazing to me as I watch developers, especially new developers, and they have one of two dreadful habits. Dreadful habit number one is they're paralyzed. They can't even start coding because they just don't know what to do. They vapor lock. And the other are the ones who glance at the story in the backlog, maybe not even look at the attachments like UI mockups or design documents or whatever, and they just start coding. They're both dreadful habits. If you understand the problem, you're going to be comfortable coding it, so you won't vapor lock. And if you understand the problem, you won't go through dreadful rework cycles, right? And so it's important that you pay attention in grooming and storytelling sessions. And no matter how junior you are, if you're the one that's going to be working on the feature as part of the feature team, it's okay to ask questions and read the story and all the attachments that go with it. And if you don't understand it, go find someone who does. And as you're thinking about it, and I even do this before I even start coding, is I'll sit down with QA and go, okay, how could we test this feature? Now, if it's a UI screen, it's going to be pretty easy to understand how to test. They're going to interact with it. They're going to write tests that speak to the requirements in the story and so on. But don't be afraid to ask questions, because asking questions is part of the Socratic method for understanding things. Second, research is good. When I interview prospective developers, I ask, what's the last thing you read about something technical? And I don't care if it's one of my YouTube videos or somebody's blog, or there was this great book, or there was an e-paper that in PDF that they read, or all the above. But I want to hear that they are in a cycle of continuous and never-ending improvement, known as Kani, and that they read constantly. If you do like a big think week, that's okay, but you're better off trying to read a few things a couple of days a week. In my case, I tend to try to read something every day. I always have a backlog of stuff to read on my tablet when I'm waiting around for something, when I am sitting on the couch in the evenings. I'll be reading something. So be an active learner as well. Reading is great, but don't be afraid to whip out your favorite coding tool, your favorite IDE, and just knock yourself out a little test or demo to make sure that you get it. Don't let your skills get stale. It's dreadfully hard if you've been institutionalized because you've been working for the same company for a long time on the same project, and there really isn't any impetus for change or the adoption of new things. Then the onus falls on you to keep up, right? Learn new things. It's not as always necessary that you do that with a certification, but they do look nice on a resume. And, the other thing about sort of coding by Stack Overflow is if you use a snippet of code that you find, two things. One is you're responsible for it, not the person who wrote it, because you're the one that used it. But, be a little generous and if you want people to keep answering questions and pasting in little snippets of code and having a couple of paragraphs of discussion, that isn't a zero effort thing that they're doing. So show them some love. Put comments in their Stack Overflow. This worked for me. It was very helpful. Or this worked for me, and like, here's my twist on it for my situation. GitHub GIFs are great for having little snippets of code. And there are lots of other ways to basically do a gist off of GitHub. But, if you grab something from Stack Overflow or anywhere else, at the very least, put a little comment above the code that says, C:\URL, right? Be a little generous where it came from. And if you're using a package manager and you pull in some open source libraries or whatever, and it helps you solve a problem, especially if it helps you solve a big problem, give a shout out to the developers, right? Go and star that project in GitHub or give it a rating on NuGet or whatever, and give some love. And if it's a big open source project that is contribution supported and it helps you out, throw them a few bucks. You'd be amazed. It's not the money necessarily as much as the recognition, and $5 or $10 can go a long way to helping some of these teams keep these things up and going. And then, of course, you're crazy if you get somebody else's code, TM, and you don't run some linting tools on it or some security scanning tools. And lastly, just pay attention to the licensing condition. Almost everything that I write and put out on the universe is MIT, which means just go with it, and it's not on me if it blows up or deletes all your files or whatever, right? But other teams have other licensing things. So it could be new licensed or some other licensing. But just before you use something, especially in a commercial product, make sure that you understand the licensing rules. And if you're unsure, go check with your compliance organization. Lead, not bleed. I know it's super tempting to use that beta of the new compiler or the next version of the programming language before it's completely stabilized. Or some completely new technology like Blazor or something. But if you're writing software for a living and it's not your shop, you're being paid by other people to write code, then the rule of thumb you should follow in being responsible developers is to lead and not bleed. Don't be on the bleeding edge. Don't expose them to that sort of risk. Always ask, can we solve this problem using something that is got a good bake level that a lot of people trust? When I'm picking out different NuGet packages that all solve the same thing, one of the things I look for is ratings and whether or not there's an active community of people keeping it up to date and so on. I don't want to bleed for my commercial customers, but I do want to lead. In other words, I don't want to rely on something that's so old and nasty that I can't deploy it on the new version of Linux because it's not compatible anymore, right? So we want to lead, we don't want to bleed. Oh, Lord, I don't even know where to start with this. It's tricky, the design thing, because I am definitely a code monkey. I design by coding, but I've also got the self-discipline to be willing to throw code away or to refactor or to, get peer feedback. I'm not afraid to run linters on my tooling. I'm not afraid to step back and use some of the analytics tools that I have at my disposal and think about whether I have good patterns. I'm never ashamed to do a pull request and reach out to one of my peers and go, I'm starting down this road. I've kind of mocked it up in code loosely. I don't intend to merge this into develop, right? But I would like you to get your feedback, right? Soliciting feedback is part of the design process. And if you remember nothing else, remember this: code in haste, repent at leisure, right? Not enough developers pay enough attention to design. And I wish that there was a way that I could give some beautiful formula. You do A, you do B, you do C, and beautiful design comes out the end. But that's not how that works. Design is almost always iterative and refactoring. And you may have something that's ready to join the develop branch and it's good enough. But then you may come back to it in 3 months and go, oh, I'm going to need to refactor this because there's this other use case. And that's okay, right? And part of being a good designer is to be a good class. Most of us work in object-oriented languages, but be a good class designer first and foremost, right? Pay attention to things like solid dependency injection and things like that. And we've got a whole presentation on things every developer should know, and you should know them. And then, it's important to follow the shop standards about error handling and logging and tracing. And so, I value slightly longer design cycles, even if those design cycles are me mocking things up in code. And then, I code a little and I test a lot, and I code a little and I test a lot. And I get at it and I git commit and I push to origin in my feature branch, because I don't push directly to the developer master branches. That's evil. Don't do that. And that allows me to solicit feedback and to contemplate things while not worrying that I'll lose my work of, quote, genius, unquote. So design, then code and test. And write useful tests. Don't test stupid stuff. I've said it in like 3 videos, but in the name of code coverage, I've seen people write tests on public string last name get set. That does not require a test, right? It just doesn't. And if that datagram is going to get serialized, right? If that field or property is part of a bigger class and that class is a DTO, it's going to get passed around, then I should write a serialization test where I fill up all of the properties with data and I serialize it and I deserialize it and I make sure that, and in so doing, I'll get 100% coverage on my DTO. But I'll do it as a side effect of testing something whose outcome is important. If my datagram fails a serialization test, it's not going to work as a contract on a REST or XML interface. And so it may not work if I'm passing my datagram, for example, between technologies. If I'm interoperating with Java, if I'm interoperating with C. So writing tests that speak to the goal as opposed to the individual operation is what you should try to be doing. And I have a bias to integration tests because I feel like they're diagnostic. Now, I grant you they're a pain to set up, but with containers and modern DevOps practices, the excuses for not writing an integration test over a unit test are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And if you're a modern shop and you still can't write integration tests, then you're not a modern shop. And frankly, you need to hire us to come and help you. When it comes to mocking frameworks, if you have something like a persistence tier that would turn it into an integration test, and you have a mock that is a reasonable mock, that is deterministic in its outcome, that you can really have act as if it were the real thing, at least for the purposes of testing, I'm okay with mocking. But I have seen so many tests where because of dependency injection, the constructor injection is done, and all of the functionality of the class is mocked till it doesn't do anything. And I just, there's a slipness test that says if this test passes, what does it mean? And if this test fails, what does it tell us? And if the answer to that is, well, we had good code coverage and it blows up, then that wasn't a useful test for you to write, right? Tests that pass should always tell you something affirmative about the goal of your code. And failed tests should tell you something diagnostic about failing to meet that goal. Don't be a bro coder. Just don't. Coding is a science infused with art and should always be done from the point of view of humility. I don't know any other way to say it. I've been writing code since I was very, very young, and I am better at it than I was when I was in single digits, but I'm still susceptible to writing code that other people look at and go, dude, you could have done that so much better if you did it this way. So be egoless about it and don't be a bro coder. And master your tools. I see especially young developers or new developers, and they're using Eclipse or they're using Code or they're using Visual Studio or they're using whatever, and they just don't know how to do basic things. They don't know how to leverage the unit testing engines that are either boltable on or built in. They don't know how to use the refactoring tools. They don't know how to use the code quality tools. They don't know how to use coding or syntax checking features that might be built into the IDE. They don't know a lot of language specifics. And so, they learn this language and it's kind of like the language they're programming in, but they haven't learned the DAO of that new stack well enough to really leverage it. And what comes out the other end is pretty bad code. So understanding your tools to the point at which you are both productive and that the tools guide you into making better code is essential for being a good developer. And everything I said about IDEs goes extra double for your CI/CD, your configuration management, whatever. Master your tools, and if you do that, you'll be the master of your delivery. So, you're only as good as your mastery of the tools. And all tools have quirks and all tools have things that you're not going to like, but you're not going to know those things until you learn to be one with the tool or the programming language. I see this all the time, people switching programming languages, and rather than try to go with the DAO of the way that particular language does it, they try to program using the sensibilities of the old stack they were on. And that's a terrible mistake because you'll never get value out of the programming language you're now using if you keep following the semantics and sensibilities of the old one. And then be a good team player, right? Keep your ALM updated. If you've got a backlog or a Kanban board or a wall of post-it notes or whatever your team does to keep track of things. And if they don't, that's a different conversation. But, make sure that you're able to provide status on your tasks. If your tasks have numbers or names or identifiers, you should know them. Or if you can't memorize them, then, have them written down. Or have them on your phone, or and keep your ALM statuses up to date. And if you're blocked, make sure that it's blocked. And if your team does Scrum, make sure that you can give status in a really crisp way. Yesterday I worked on 421.27 and did a pull request. It's waiting for review. I also did 427.39. I did a pull request. It's waiting for review. I started 4,170, and I am going to continue to work on that today, and then I'll pick up the next available task. I have no blockers. There, that was the perfect Scrum status. Okay, so keep your statuses in the ALM up to date and be able to give status really quickly on anything. And if the person who's soliciting status from you needs more details, they'll ask. Do not give them your doctoral dissertation. Give them the bullets and let them drill into it. And just be the best you can be. The best way to be exceptional, my old boss used to say, is to be consistently average. Consistency is way more valuable than sucking 4 days out of 5 and having genius moments on the 5th day. Just being consistently at a particular skill level and always being trying to ratchet that skill level up just a little bit more than you did yesterday is the way to be exceptional. Have tempo, right? People should be able to count on you to deliver business value at a steady speed at the required quality bar, right? So if you can deliver faster, but your code is buggy as hell, then what you need to do is to slow down, because delivering higher quality code a little more slowly actually delivers better business value than delivering stuff left and right that just explodes or doesn't do the right thing. And then manage risk, right? Even if you're a very junior coder, right? You need to be thinking about risk and tempo. You know, if you have a method and it takes arguments, you should probably validate the arguments. And if you're using any decent kind of linting tool, it'll tell you so. And then just, you know, if you find yourself getting wrapped up around the axle of something, take a walk, right? Get some fresh air, take a spin around the building, you know, get a glass of water, do a bio break, do whatever it takes for you to do to manage your frustration and stress. And if you're a relatively junior developer, the thing that I tell them is don't take it home, right? The time between you leave work and you get home is your airlock, and you need to do whatever you need to do so that when you get home, you've left the day behind you. And I know it's hard. And the more programmery you are, like I'm OCD to a ridiculous extent, the harder it is. But you have to find a way to stay level and be the best person you can be. And that means time management. Be on time to meetings. There is nothing more rude than being late. And if you're running a meeting, holy cow, do you have a deep responsibility to make sure they start on time and they end a little early, and they always end with action items. If you have a meeting and it comes to the end and there's no action items, then you just had a wasted meeting. There are no such things as useful meetings without action items. Even if you're calling the team together that says, hey, a lot of people have been dividing by 0, don't do that. There's an action item. Don't divide by 0. And make sure that as people exit the meeting and as a follow-up to the meeting by email or whatever, that you make it crystal clear what the action items are and who owns them. So, and you know what? If you're a contractor or whatever, don't work for free. If you work for an organization and, you know, don't give them a ton of free time, right? You shouldn't be, if you find yourself being a superhero a lot, that means you've either taken on more onus than you should, or you have inadvertently set an expectation of tempo that is unsustainable. You will burn to a crisp.